Hey people, of course we're going to talk about Omicron today after a few days of a new terror narrative being pushed and pushed and pushed by bureaucrats, politicians, and the people who love them, namely the mainstream media, who seem to be completely and utterly irresponsibly addicted to a fear campaign. I also want to say just at the offset here that this is a fear campaign against the citizenry. We are the ones who must live with and deal with the anxiety, the sleeplessness, and the depression that comes from the constant pushing of fear. And they let it recede a little bit and then away we go. This is so bad for people. It's certainly journalistic malpractice. It's medical malpractice, it's public health malpractice. This is not how you do it, because what you are doing is actually hurting people. And given what we're hearing is the end game of Omicron, which is that it is mild, quite mild, the response to it may actually have caused more harm than this virus is going to cause. And I mean that in all sincerity. That's not hyperbole. People were on both sides of the COVID aisle. The COVID fear people, in other words, people who are terrified of it and have been permanently scarred by their fear, were more terrified and slunk further back under their beds, never to come out of their apartments again. And the people who are more reasonable in their approach, i.e. that COVID is real, COVID is dangerous for some people, not dangerous for most people. Vaccines work pretty well in some circumstances for a limited period of time. There are therapeutics being used that work well, including monoclonal antibodies. Those are the two groups. The people in the second group, of which I am a proud member, see what they're doing ginning up another fear narrative, and we also have a reaction. I was so upset, I thought, wow, here we go again, watching the absolutely lurid coverage, which was underpinned by nothing but assumptions. There was literally no science involved in the fear campaign that attended the announcement of this mutation, right? Viruses mutate. Virus gonna virus, to quote our old friend who was kicked off Twitter. That's what they do. And when they mutate, they tend to mutate to be less dangerous and more spreadable, more contagious, right? Viruses don't want to kill the host in which they're living. That is virology 101. There was absolutely no reason for the world to run yet again to the ramparts with another scare narrative around COVID, let alone taking more action, stopping flights and insisting on masks, and are we going to cancel Christmas? I mean, it was just insane, including the World Health Organization, who should know better. We know they don't know better, but this was really, they should be getting up and saying, look, people, we're checking it out. We're going to get to the bottom of it. So far, no one has died as of this recording. No one's died of it yet, or even been hospitalized as far as I can tell. And who should be the one stepping up to do that? But for some reason, they aren't. And I just want to read a headline about the WHO statement, the first statement, which was, Omicron poses very high global risk. World must prepare. They don't say a risk of what. This is what they do. They have these kind of amorphous, non-data driven, kind of vague threats that it's going to be really bad, but they don't actually predict anything because they don't have the data to predict, and they're just telling a story. That's what they did. They're telling a story. And here's how it was reported. The heavily mutated Omicron coronavirus variant is likely to spread internationally and poses a very high risk of infection surges that could have severe consequences in some places, the World Health Organization said on Monday. No deaths have been linked or reported. and further research was needed to assess its potential to resist vaccines and immunity induced by previous infections. So what's important there about Omicron is the second paragraph, but that's not how the story is told by WHO. It's not how it's told by the media, and shame on them. Now we hear from the lovely lady who was the first, she's said to be the first clinician to deal with this. There's some other pretty good reporting that Omicron was out there in other countries for quite a while, but she's the first clinician we can rely on who's speaking out, who had some experience treating this thing. Here's what she's saying in an op-ed she wrote for the Daily Mail. It's insane. Nothing has prepared me for the global reaction that met my announcement this week that I had seen a young man in my surgery who had a case of COVID that turned out to be the Omicron variant. This version of the virus had been circulating in southern Africa for some time, having been previously identified in Botswana. But given my public-facing role by announcing its presence in my own patient, I unwittingly brought it to global attention. Here's what she says. Quite simply, I have been stunned at the response, and especially from Britain. And let me be clear, nothing I have seen about this new variant warrants the extreme action the UK government has taken in response to it. No one here in South Africa is known to have been hospitalized with the Omicron variant, nor is anyone here believed to have fallen seriously ill with it. Yet, she says, Britain and other European nations and other countries outside of Europe have reacted with heavy travel restrictions on flights from across southern Africa, as well as imposing tighter rules at home on mask wearing fines and extended quarantines. She says, we just don't know enough about it to make such judgments or impose such policies. This is a sane and honorable woman. Wait till they come for her. They'll be digging dirt on her soon. She has exactly the right approach. She's stunned by the response to her announcement. What happened was, it seems like it went from one country to another country to another country, with leaders and public health officials all wanting to outdo each other by showing that they're responsive to this. Nobody wants to be the guy whose country didn't react to the fear narrative properly and then had a deadly outbreak of Omicron, even though there's no reason to suspect that might happen. What you are seeing now is propaganda. The response to Omicron is a study in propaganda. It's not science. It wasn't based on sound principles. Nobody seemed to really be thinking it through because they had nothing to base the terror on, since the woman who had clinical experience with it said it was mild, right? One could argue, well, maybe it's not mild in older people. I believe her patients were younger, but we know that. Older people are also vulnerable to flu. So maybe we want to take a little bit of a stronger precautions, focused protection in long-term care, which we don't seem to be doing very well with Omicron, but that's it. Why is everybody going insane? It's propaganda. It's not wanting to be the one who was left out of standing up with the biggest terror campaign. I mean, for God's sake, President Biden addressed the nation about it. It was insane. Here's the upside of it. Here's why I wanted to tell you. I was quite upset when it happened because I thought, here we go again. They never learn. And as long as the media is completely in lockstep with the failing public health policy and the politicians on this, we'll never get out. But I believe that these events were so obvious, so egregious, and so quickly did we go from, we're all going to die, to it's mild, people, that maybe even the most frightened people, the people who are hiding under their beds because of COVID, will see a pattern about what has been happening here, right? Open the kimono. They've inadvertently opened their own kimono, and they've kind of showed the playbook, haven't they? So I'm hoping that Omicron is actually the end of the pandemic. Wishful thinking, I know. But the end of the pandemic on two fronts. Number one, it exposed the utter ineptitude, the callous disregard for our mental health, the callous disregard for truth-telling in science. It exposed all of that. All of it was exposed in this story. Do your own Google research and do a timeline of who said what when, and you'll see what I'm saying. But Omicron, if it is much more contagious and super mild, which is where viruses go as they mutate, everybody knows this, Virology 101, maybe it will get us to a place of herd immunity if a lot of people get it and have mild disease. You see, many of us are still living with a narrative that the choices are either infected or not infected. And if you get infected, you die unless you have a vaccine. That's a lie. Lots of people, most people, the vast majority of people who get COVID have a safe outcome from it. There are things between nothing and a vaccine, including therapeutics, that are really moving quickly down the pipeline now, including monoclonal antibodies. But the story as it's told, and you'll also see that story woven through this fear campaign. Oh, the vaccines might not catch us. We don't know. We've got to do another booster. Of course, all the vaccine companies wade right in the way they do. But vaccines aren't the only way. I mean, for old people in long-term care who have comorbidities, it's great to have them, and would be great if Omicron is escaping the vaccine to maybe have something to give them. But there's other treatments. We don't need to panic. And a public health bureaucracy and a news media and governments whose default position is to create panic in the citizenry they are not concerned about public health. They're not concerned about your health, and they're not concerned about the well-being of the people in their nations. They're just not. And I think that this proves that point very, very clearly. So maybe it wasn't a bad thing. Anyway, stay critical. See ya.